A small family in a quiet American town. In the heart of a peaceful suburban town in Texas, the Johnson family lived what many would describe as the classic American dream. Emily Johnson, a dedicated office worker in her early 30s, started each day with the gentle routine of preparing breakfast for her family in their sun-filled kitchen. Her husband, Jack, charming and well-liked in the community, worked as a local real estate agent. Jack had the kind of easy smile and steady handshake that made neighbors trust him on sight. Their only son, little Ethan, was just turning 7, a bright, energetic kid, always eager to show his latest drawings or recount tales from the playground at school. Most weekends, the Johnsons would gather around the backyard barbecue, the air filled with the scent of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter floating over the fence to friendly neighbors. Emily's closest friend, Sarah Miller, was practically part of the family. Sarah was a teacher at the local elementary school, and being single, often joined the Johnsons for Sunday dinners or family game nights. She was the kind of friend who could arrive unannounced, arms cradling a freshly baked pie, ready to help with anything from babysitting Ethan to lending an ear after a long week. The Johnson house itself sat at the end of a tree-lined street, a modest but warm 2-story home where Emily had carefully chosen every curtain and picture frame. The walls echoed with everyday joy, Ethan's excited shouts, the beep of Jack's phone with new work leads, the soft hum of Emily's favorite vinyl records spinning in the living room. To outsiders, their life seemed simple and content. A supportive marriage, a healthy child, and a steady routine of shared meals, community events, and cherished friendships. There were family photos lining the mantelpiece, vacation postcards on the fridge, and an unspoken trust that, no matter how hectic life became, home would always be a safe haven. For all its ordinariness, this American family seemed to have what everyone wanted: love, stability, and the warmth of genuine connection. Subtle cracks would begin to show. As the seasons changed and years went by, faint cracks slowly appeared in the Johnsons' seemingly perfect life. So subtle at first that they were easy to overlook. Arguments started creeping into daily routines, disguised as small disagreements about chores, finances, or Ethan's education. Emily noticed that Jack had grown quicker to raise his voice or sigh in frustration over the most trivial matters, turning innocent slip-ups, forgotten grocery items, tardy school pickups, into larger complaints about her supposed lack of attention. Jack began to criticize Emily more frequently, not just in private, but sometimes in the company of friends or extended family. He questioned her choices at home, her parenting methods, and even the trajectory of her career, making offhand remarks that lingered painfully long after the dinner table had cleared. These criticisms, although seemingly casual, always cut deeper than they appeared, and Emily found herself withdrawing, losing some of the easy confidence she once carried. Even simple, joyful occasions, like Sunday barbecues or family movie nights, started to feel different. Jack's jokes sometimes had a sharper edge, his compliments for Emily sounding increasingly rare or forced. Some nights, she'd catch him staring off with a distant look or distractedly scrolling through his phone during their old routines, moments they used to cherish together. Emily tried to brush these feelings aside, thinking maybe work stress or the pressures of parenting were to blame. Yet the once warm and effortless partnership began to feel like carefully tiptoeing around invisible landmines, never quite certain what might spark the next disagreement. At times, Jack would apologize, brushing off his mood as just a rough day, and Emily, determined to preserve her family's harmony, was quick to forgive. She trusted that this phase would pass, as all rough patches do. But beneath the surface, Emily couldn't ignore a subtle but growing sense of distance. She began to feel as though she was always at fault, walking on eggshells and trying desperately to meet shifting expectations she no longer understood. Before she could make sense of it, the foundation on which their idyllic family had been built was quietly, painfully beginning to erode. Secrets behind closed doors. Emily had always trusted Jack. For over a decade, he'd been her partner, her pillar, her greatest confidant. She'd imagined they shared everything: household chores, hopes for Ethan's future, little inside jokes told in the quiet safety of their bedroom after a long day. It was this foundation of trust that perhaps made the subtle changes in his behavior all the more chilling. It started innocuously. A few late nights here, a business trip rescheduled there. Jack's job as a real estate agent had always been demanding, often requiring weekend showings or the occasional early morning call. But lately, his absences had become more frequent, and his explanations had grown vaguer. "There's a property out in Lakeview. Gotta meet a client," he'd say over breakfast, barely making eye contact. Some nights, he wouldn't get home until long after Ethan was asleep. And sometimes, Emily, waiting in the soft glow of the kitchen light, would hear the garage door open past midnight. Technology, too, had shifted subtly into a wall between them. Jack had never been secretive about his phone, leaving it on the counter, charging in the living room at night, until, suddenly, he wasn't. Now his phone was constantly on his person, slipping into his pocket whenever Emily entered the room. Whenever a text pinged, Jack's thumb would move quickly, eyes darting, voice shifting ever so slightly into an unfamiliar seriousness. Emily found herself wondering what she was missing, or worse, if she was just becoming paranoid. She tried to voice her concerns, once or twice, during the fragile calm before sleep. Jack would sigh, draw her in, and assure her he was just tired, overwhelmed, under pressure. "I'm building something for us, Em," he'd whisper. "Just trust me." At first, Emily believed him, but the changes in their social circles began to gnaw at her peace of mind. Friends who once lingered over board games, in pie at their dining table, now left early or made excuses. Most notably, Sarah, her oldest, dearest friend and Ethan's godmother, had started acting distant. Sarah, who had never missed a single Johnson family outing, now declined invitations, replying curtly to Emily's texts. The separation made no sense. Emily replayed recent conversations, searching for some casual slight or unintentional offense, but found nothing. As the sense of isolation crept in, Emily noticed how Jack often stayed on his phone late into the night, the glow of the screen throwing sharp shadows across his face as he swiped and typed. "Work stuff," he mumbled whenever she asked. But every now and then, when Jack turned away too quickly or tilted the screen out of her view, a weight of suspicion pressed down on Emily's chest. One rainy Thursday evening, after Jack left for yet another supposed late showing, a wave of restlessness drove Emily to their home office. She sat down by the family computer, a machine used more for Ethan's schoolwork than anything else. Something caught her eye. The browser had a few open tabs. Emily hesitated, her fingers trembling, torn between respecting her husband's privacy and the gnawing fear in her stomach. Finally, she clicked. A string of strange search histories and lingering email drafts popped up. There were property listings. Nothing new there. But mixed among them were social media profiles of women Emily didn't recognize,
Yes, this one.
interspersed with text messages drafted and then deleted. While none of it was outright incriminating, the pattern seemed off. When she tried to explore further, she realized Jack had changed the passwords to both his email and their shared cloud account. Days passed, but Emily couldn't let it go. The suspicions grew louder, impossible to quiet. The next Saturday, while Jack showered before heading out for coffee with a buyer, Emily palmed his phone from the nightstand. Heart racing, she typed the 4-digit code she'd always known. Denied. After 3 more attempts, the phone locked her out. Looking for something?
Urgent.
Jack's voice startled her from the doorway.
Dispose of everything.
Frozen. Caught in the act, Emily looked up. For a split second, his expression was unreadable. Then he smiled, a forced version of his usual charm, and took the phone from her hands. "You know I hate it when people touch my stuff without asking," he said, planting a kiss on her cheek. Emily smiled back, but dread curled inside her. That evening, after Ethan was tucked in, Emily tried to call Sarah, desperate for the warmth and comfort of her friend's perspective. The call went to voicemail. She texted, asking if they could talk, but received only a heart emoji in reply. In the days that followed, Sarah's social media presence seemed emptier. No new photos, no comments on Emily's posts, or likes for Ethan's drawings. Despite her exhaustion, Emily grew intent on unearthing whatever truths hid in the shadows. She created a new social media account under a pseudonym, befriending Jack to watch his activities from an outside perspective. Late at night, she scrolled through old posts, cross-referenced tags and timestamps, and pored over comments and likes. There were photos of Jack out at dinner, drinks clinking with groups she didn't recognize. Once, she saw Sarah in the background, laughing at something Jack whispered. The world Emily once thought she understood felt like it was folding in on itself. She started double-checking credit card statements, noticing unfamiliar transactions, flowers delivered, dinners at upscale restaurants, hotel stays in the name of business. Every discovery made her feel as if she were losing her footing, the ground shifting beneath her. Desperate for proof, before voicing any accusations, Emily went as far as checking their home's surveillance system, footage she'd never thought to review before. On more than one occasion, she saw Sarah's car parked in front of their house when she was supposed to be at work, Jack ushering her in while Emily was out with Ethan. The silent images tore at Emily's heart, creating an ache that deepened with every revelation. At work, Emily struggled to focus, her mind clouded by 1,000 swirling questions. Co-workers, once friendly and warm, now whispered as she passed. Emily wondered if she was imagining their coldness, or if word of something, she didn't even know what, had started to spread. One afternoon, as she bent to organize a stack of files, she overheard her supervisor mention her name in a hushed, pitying tone. Emily realized that the web Jack was weaving reached further than she'd imagined. He began to invent stories about her, sharing tales of her emotional instability and erratic behavior with family and friends. At home, he alternated between friendly and cold, attentive and dismissive, as if daring her to call him out. Through all this, Ethan sensed the tension. Emily watched her son's baffled expression as his parents bickered over nothing. She tried to shield him, tucking him in at night with extra stories and long hugs. But she knew children understood more than adults wanted to believe. As the days grew shorter, so did Emily's patience for living in the darkness of uncertainty. Armed with pieces of evidence, she began to seek help, not just from friends who still trusted her, but from professionals. She scheduled a meeting with a local therapist, desperate to make sense of the paranoia and reality twisting in her own mind. Behind closed doors, the Johnson family looked ordinary. But inside, secrets multiplied. Emily's quiet strength mounted, a resolve fueled by betrayal, and the stubborn love a mother carries when everything she's ever built is threatened by lies. The time for answers was coming. She could feel it. All she needed was the proof and the courage to drag the truth out into the light. The painful blame game. With the home's foundation already shaken by suspicion and secrecy, Jack's tactics grew even more calculated, shifting from covert betrayal to psychological warfare. Emily, bewildered and reeling from her clandestine discoveries, found herself sucked further into a vortex of confusion as Jack masterfully spun narratives that turned every confrontation into an attack on her character. It started subtly, almost insidiously, with Jack sidestepping accountability each time Emily raised questions about his absences or secretive behavior. Rather than addressing the substance of her concerns, he'd exhale in exasperation, looking genuinely wounded. "I can't believe you don't trust me. After everything I do for this family, this is what I get?" His voice would rise just enough to send Ethan scurrying from the room, then soften again, each word laced with disappointment. At first, Emily doubted herself. She replayed their conversations endlessly, wondering if she actually had misread the evidence or overreacted to Jack's defensiveness. But the longer it went on, the clearer his manipulations became. Any honest attempt to communicate her worries was twisted into an accusation against her own stability. Jack was a master at projecting. When Emily expressed anxiety, he called her paranoid or obsessive. If she showed sadness, he accused her of being depressive, incapable of keeping her emotions in check. He would sigh and tell her to get some rest, or suggest that she was letting her imagination run wild, often followed by pointed comments about how Sarah, in contrast, was easy to talk to and always so understanding. These barbs landed like darts, hollowing out what little self-assurance Emily still possessed. The manipulation wasn't confined to private moments. Jack's campaign against Emily crept into public spaces: dinner with friends, family gatherings, even church picnics. Carefully, he began to reframe Emily's perfectly valid frustrations as signs of instability. At a neighborhood cookout, he'd jokingly mention, "Em's been a bit high-strung lately. Long work hours, you know." Family dinners turned into showcases for his patience, subtly rolling his eyes when she forgot a detail or set down a glass too forcefully. Laughter followed, uncomfortable and unwitting, as friends echoed the narrative. "You need to relax, Emily." What Emily didn't see at first was Jack's quiet use of social media to fortify his side of the story. He posted photos of himself cooking dinner or helping Ethan with his homework, captioned, "Holding down the fort while Emily's working late, during dad life," crafting an image of a selfless, steadfast father. Private messages to mutual friends painted him as the spouse left to pick up the pieces, hinting at Emily's supposed mood swings and erratic outbursts. A few longtime friends even messaged Emily, gently suggesting she take it easy or talk to someone. Concerned, but ultimately convinced by Jack's version of reality. Isolation followed as old confidants grew scarce. Calls went unreturned and invitations thinned out. When Emily did get together with friends, conversations felt guarded, punctuated by meaningful glances she wasn't meant to see. At work, her reputation suffered in small but significant ways. A forgotten deadline wasn't just a mistake. It was whispered evidence that Emily was spiraling. Sarah's betrayal made everything harder to bear. Sarah, once her sounding board, and her safety net, now rarely visited and kept their exchanges superficial when they met. When Emily tentatively probed, Sarah would deflect, expressing support for both Jack and Emily, but never committing to either side, a balancing act that only worsened Emily's sense of abandonment. One night, after a particularly tense argument, Jack escalated the blame game. "Look at yourself, Em. Nobody wants to be around you. You used to laugh, have fun. Now you're always angry or crying. It's exhausting." There was no room for Emily's pain or confusion. Her distress was recast as a personal failing, laying the groundwork for a narrative that cast him as the victim. Even Ethan, still just a child, internalized the shifts within the home. He tiptoed around the house, quietly playing near the edge of rooms, watching his mother's face for signs of a smile or a storm. On days when Jack was especially cold, Ethan would crawl into Emily's lap, wordlessly offering the comfort they were both starved for. The relentless blame took a toll. Emily noticed herself second-guessing every word and action. She'd hesitate before speaking, measuring her tone, afraid that the wrong look or phrase would send Jack into another monologue about her mental state. Sleepless nights became the norm, spent tossing in bed alongside a man who seemed increasingly like a stranger. She'd search his face in the dark, desperate for the warmth that once lived there, and find only the cool reflection of her own doubt. Outside of the home, the world felt unfriendly. Neighbors she once swapped recipes with now waved from a distance. Parents at Ethan's school averted their eyes or offered fake smiling platitudes. Emily's universe, once safe and full of connection, narrowed to the suffocating walls of her own home and the echo of Jack's accusations. Behind closed doors, the gaslighting intensified. Jack would bring up small, insignificant details from the past: a burned dinner, a misplaced check, a forgotten birthday text. Each was wielded as proof of Emily's inadequacy. "You can't even remember the little things. How can I trust you to handle our family?" he'd say. If Emily tried to record their arguments or save screenshots of cruel texts, Jack would flip the script, accusing her of being controlling or invading his privacy. At a breaking point, Emily began to withdraw. If Jack wanted to paint her as unstable, then she would show as little as possible, closing up, even in front of Ethan. But the silence brought her no peace. The house itself seemed to close in, full of resentments and unfinished conversations. In time, the blame game left deeper scars than even Jack's betrayal. Emily stood in the center of her once loving home, battered by doubt and weary from war, barely able to recognize the woman she had become. Yet a slow, simmering resolve began to grow. Each blow from Jack, each whispered rumor and cold shoulder became another brick in the wall she would eventually use to shield herself, and, one day, to rise again. The painful blame game tested every fiber of Emily's identity, pushing her to the edge of despair.
Hello again.
For the first time,
Hello.
she understood that sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought in the open, but within the heart, behind doors quietly closed against the world. But within those shadows, Emily began, quietly and desperately, to rediscover her own strength and nurture the faint hope that she might someday tell the truth and reclaim her story. The truth comes to light as autumn settled over the suburb, with golden leaves blanketing the streets and a cold wind rattling the windows of the Johnsons' home.
Okay,
Emily
what am I
found
missing here?
that her patience, once deep and yielding, was finally at its limit. The daily uncertainty no longer felt like something she could silently endure. Every morning, as she watched Ethan eat his cereal, and every evening, as she listened to Jack's footsteps echo through the hallway. Emily fought the urge to scream out the truth she suspected, but could not yet fully prove. The need for clarity became an obsession. Emily began to view her life through the lens of an investigator, determined to piece together her own reality. As sleep became elusive, she pored over fragments, disjointed memories, fleeting glances, erased call logs, and half-heard whispers, trying to arrange them into a coherent picture. It was exhausting, but the alternative was worse, living with the gnawing ache of doubt. Her detective work began small. She started meticulously cross-referencing Jack's receipts with his claimed whereabouts. A lunch at an upscale Italian bistro he'd never mentioned, a bouquet of roses charged to the credit card, hotel reservations made under the pretense of company training. Emily carefully photographed these, emailing them to herself under innocuous subject lines. She checked their home's security system, something she'd never thought to question before, and found brief windows, mid-mornings, late afternoons, where Sarah's car appeared in their driveway when Emily herself was away at work. Technology became both her adversary and her ally. Locked out of Jack's phone and email, she learned to retrieve deleted files from their shared cloud storage, finding just enough traces, cropped images, forgotten calendar appointments, even a hastily deleted selfie of Jack and Sarah together, taken in her kitchen to sew the outline of betrayal. Her hands trembled as she saved each new file, fearing Jack would somehow know she had crossed an invisible line of no return. There was a moment, in the dead of night, when Emily sat at the kitchen table, papers and screenshots fanned out before her, and realized she had enough. Enough to know she wasn't crazy, enough to prove she wasn't the villain Jack depicted, enough to break the silence he'd wrapped her in. The weight of certainty was a strange mix of grief and relief. Still, it was not enough for Emily to know. She had to be heard. Isolation had never suited her. She missed community, missed clarity, missed the truth that once gave her comfort. Yet she knew that confronting Jack alone would be futile. He would twist her words, as he always did, into accusations against her. He had already sown seeds of mistrust in their circle, manipulating others from behind the scenes. The only path left to Emily was to take the truth public and let the world judge for itself. Emily's plan came together with surprising calm.
Oh my God.
First, she gathered all her evidence: photos, chat logs, security footage, financial records, and organized them chronologically. She wrote her own account in plain, simple words, refusing to let bitterness color her version of events. She wanted people to see what had happened in all its devastating clarity. The subtle betrayals, the manipulations, the way her world had been turned upside down, not by her failings, but by the ones who professed to love her. She considered waiting, giving Jack one last chance to explain, but knew in her heart that the moment for private negotiation had passed. Honesty demanded the risk of exposure. The next step was to bring light to the secrets. Early one Saturday morning, with Ethan still asleep upstairs, Emily logged onto her social media account. Her hands shook as she hit post, sharing her story for the first time. Not in anger, but in a desperate, earnest plea for understanding. The reaction was almost immediate, and far louder than she had anticipated. Friends, family, acquaintances, and even strangers began to comment and share the post. Some expressed shock, others sorrow. A few tried to remain neutral, but almost all condemned deception. Emily felt a surge of validation as former colleagues and neighbors sent her private messages describing their own unease at Jack's behavior or recalling small, strange moments they hadn't made sense of until now. Sarah, caught as much by surprise as Jack, received a tidal wave of messages. Her reputation in the school district, a place built on trust, crumpled overnight. Colleagues whispering behind her back. The principal calling her in for a tense, uncomfortable meeting. She reached out to Emily, pleading for a private conversation. But Emily was not ready for reconciliation. Jack responded just as Emily expected, first with outrage, then with desperate attempts to control the narrative. He bombarded her with texts and voicemails, alternately apologetic and furious. He accused her of betrayal, of blowing things out of proportion, of not caring about their family's reputation. But now, with her story in the open and the evidence plain for all to see, his words no longer held the same weight. The mask had slipped. The world could finally see what Emily had endured. For Emily's wider circle, there was a period of collective reckoning. Some friends and relatives reached out to apologize for doubting her. Others remained silent, unable to process the shattering of their illusions. Social gatherings now had a charged, uncertain energy. Some people kept their distance, not sure what to say. A few quietly left casseroles on her porch, a small gesture of support. At work, colleagues who had once whispered now greeted her with newfound respect, their own small way of making amends. Through it all, Emily protected Ethan fiercely. She shielded him from the chaos, answering his questions gently, honestly, in age-appropriate truths. Daddy and Mommy are having a hard time, but we both love you very much, she told him, hugging him tight on nights when thunder rumbled outside and the world felt bigger than ever. Therapy sessions became Emily's lifeline, a space where she could process her anger and grief with someone who didn't judge or doubt her. Her counselor helped her untangle feelings of guilt and confusion, showing her how to set boundaries and rebuild self-trust, the precious ingredient she'd been stripped of over the years. One of the hardest lessons Emily faced was learning to forgive herself, not for ruining the family, as Jack always claimed, but for believing in lies for so long. She discovered strength not in denial, but in the courage to face reality and act on behalf of herself and her son. Time did not heal everything, but it offered perspective. What Emily once saw only as devastation, she began to see as liberation, a painful, necessary breaking open that allowed her to begin again. In the quiet aftermath, sitting at her kitchen table, lit by the early morning sun, Emily finally allowed herself to breathe. The truth, once hidden and denied, had come to light, and with it, the first fragile seeds of hope planted in the ashes of everything she thought she knew. The judgment of American society. In America, stories do not unfold in isolation. Private lives, especially those that once seemed picture-perfect, often become public spectacle once the mask slips. News of the Johnson family's collapse spread quickly, faster, perhaps, than Emily could ever have imagined. Social media, the local grapevine, and neighborhood whispers all converged to ensure that nearly everyone in their town, and later their wider community, knew about the scandal. At first, the predominant reaction was shock. The Johnsons had seemed so ordinary, so stable, friendly, dependable. Neighbors who attended cookouts at their backyard barbecue struggled to reconcile their memories of laughter with the emerging revelations of betrayal and deceit. Teachers from Ethan's school exchanged whispers in the faculty lounge. Local church members offered prayers tinged with gossip. Even at the grocery store, sideways glances followed Emily down the aisles. But in this age of digital connectivity, judgment is rarely nuanced. Social media set the tone. A wildfire of reposted statuses, indirect questions, and thinly veiled opinions. Some people took Emily's side instantly, lauding her bravery for speaking her truth and exposing what she had endured. Others, clinging to the image of Jack as an affable, hard-working dad, doubted the story or accused Emily of making private matters shamefully or public. Within days of Emily's post, the local Facebook group was in turmoil. Anonymous commenters dissected everything from her parenting to her appearance, spurred by the false familiarity of social networks. Some expressed concern for Ethan, others demanded more proof, and a few urged everyone to mind their own business. But that's not how things work in small-town America. Private scandals are a communal event. For Jack and Sarah, the backlash was swift and overwhelming. Jack's carefully maintained reputation eroded as news spread of his affair and duplicity. Clients who had once trusted him with their homes withdrew their business. His agency faced awkward questions, and his colleagues treated him like an object of curiosity or pity. Sarah, once a beloved teacher, faced a far colder fate. Her inbox filled with angry parent messages, and school administrators discreetly discussing her future with the district. Her friendships dissolved overnight. Even outside of work, people she had known for years avoided her in public. Both families felt the aftershocks. Jack's family, having initially rushed to defend him, fell silent as the evidence mounted. Their calls to Emily shifted from skepticism to awkward apologies. Sarah's relatives reached out to Emily, sometimes out of genuine regret, and sometimes out of self-interest, hoping to mend what remained of their social standing. For Emily, support came in unpredictable, sometimes contradictory waves. Old friends she hadn't spoken to in years wrote to offer comfort and recount their own experiences with betrayal. Others slid quietly out of her life, fearing association with the taint of scandal. At work, a few co-workers became sudden allies, while others, having once gossiped about her supposed emotional instability, now sought forgiveness, their own judgments laid bare. American society, for all its professed openness, carries complex expectations about marriage, motherhood, and womanhood, especially in suburban settings. Emily found herself walking a tightrope. On one hand, championed as a survivor who took control of her narrative. On the other, criticized for not keeping family problems behind closed doors or for not leaving sooner. Well-meaning acquaintances would offer advice that sounded more like veiled criticism. "You're so strong. I could never go through something like that." Or, "Have you considered how this will affect Ethan in the long run?" The implication was often clear. Whatever choice she made, judgment would follow. Even as praise flowed in for her bravery, Emily felt the weight of expectation. Some wanted her to forgive and fix things for Ethan's sake. Others wanted her to pursue legal vengeance against Jack and Sarah. Still others, uncomfortable with the very public nature of the scandal, simply wished she would move and allow the neighborhood to forget. The pressures of American society can be subtle and suffocating. For weeks, Emily could barely leave her house without feeling observed, or, worse, avoided. At Ethan's soccer practice, other parents watched her with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. Invitations to neighborhood get-togethers quietly evaporated, replaced by polite but chilly greetings. The message was unmistakable. She was neither wholly shunned nor fully embraced. Still, there were small moments of grace. A neighbor left a loaf of warm bread on her doorstep, with a handwritten note reading, "You're not alone." Members of her support group, mostly strangers she'd met online, became an unexpected source of strength. Their messages offering validation and the comfort that comes from shared experience. American society is, in many ways, contradictory. While it celebrates those who confront injustice, it also demands they do so within the bounds of decorum and without threatening the collective sense of normalcy. Emily's experience with the public's judgment was a crash course in these conflicting expectations. She realized that many people's reactions said less about her and more about their own fears, the fear that something similar could disrupt their own tidy lives. In time, the storm of speculation and commentary began to recede, as even the most titillating tales are eventually nudged out by new headlines and local dramas. For Emily, this cooling allowed her to reclaim a measure of privacy, although the old routines would never return entirely. People remembered, but most moved on. Jack and Sarah, for their part, faced deep and lasting consequences. Jack switched jobs and withdrew from community events, his once public optimism replaced by defensive reserve. Sarah transferred schools, her reputation in tatters, her once bright future irrevocably darkened. They, too, carried the scars of social judgment, a price that lingered long after apologies were made, and forgiveness, or at least silence, was asked for. For Ethan, the nuances of adulthood were lost. What he felt were shifts in the air, the loss of familiar rituals, the palpable tension. Emily worked hard to shield him from the worst, but could not protect him from everything. The question she faced, how much did the world's judgment matter, shifted over time from biting anxiety to weary acceptance. In the end, American society moved forward, as it always does. Curiosity satiated, lessons learned, scars barely visible beneath the makeup of daily life. For Emily, the only judgment that truly remained was her own, the knowledge that, even under the harshest scrutiny, she had survived, spoken truth, and begun to build something new from the debris. And somewhere in that honest reckoning, she found something uniquely American, the stubborn hope that tomorrow could still be better, not despite the past, but because of the strength discovered in weathering it. Rising from the ashes, with the dust of public scrutiny settling and the fragments of her former life scattered around her, Emily stood at a crossroads, the future uncertain but charged with possibility. The old certainties, marriage, trust, community, had either vanished or transformed into things she barely recognized. Yet, amid the wreckage, another feeling took root, a quiet, stubborn determination to rebuild, not just for herself, but for her son, Ethan. If the world she once knew had been shattered, she would have to imagine and claim a new one. The first step was acknowledging how deeply she had been wounded, not just by betrayal, but by the years spent doubting herself, by the emotional manipulations and the silent erosion of her confidence. Emily began attending regular therapy, seeking not just a space to vent her anger or sorrow, but to understand how she might move forward. Through patient, sometimes painful sessions, she reflected on the pattern of walking on eggshells, apologizing for things she hadn't done, and accepting blame that was never hers to bear. Her therapist encouraged her to grieve, not just for the marriage, but for the version of herself she'd lost in the process. Emily started journaling with a kind of desperation, pages filling with angry questions and sad memories, but also glimpses of hope. You are not the sum of someone else's criticism, her counselor reminded her. As the weeks went by, she felt a subtle shift, a return of the inner voice that Jack's gaslighting and societal judgment had tried to silence. Determined to regain her independence, Emily revisited her dreams before marriage, some abandoned, others forgotten entirely. She researched continuing education, programs, inspired by a curiosity she'd set aside while raising Ethan and supporting Jack's career. Night after night, after tucking her son into bed, she browsed online courses in project management, graphic design, and psychology. This time, her education wouldn't be a means to support someone else's ambitions. It was a commitment to her own growth. Change rippled outward from these choices. Emily began applying for jobs in the city, seeking an environment where her reputation wasn't defined by the past. The process was slow and humbling. Job interviews left her anxious. The city's impersonal sprawl was intimidating after years in a close-knit suburb. Still, she pressed forward, updating her resume in the evenings, learning how to speak about gaps in her work history with honesty instead of embarrassment. One autumn morning, she received an offer for an entry-level communications position at an advertising agency downtown. The salary wasn't lavish, and the commute would test her resolve. But when she called her parents with the news, her voice trembled with unexpected joy. "I'm going to be okay," she told her mother. Maybe even better than okay. With the new job came a new routine for Emily and Ethan, a daily ride into the city, exploring unfamiliar parks on weekends, picnics and laughter in places that didn't hold the ghosts of family cookouts gone wrong. Emily saw changes in her son, too. The anxiety that once wrinkled his brow slowly gave way to a calm curiosity. Mother and son discovered a camaraderie that ran deeper than ever before. Together, they were learning what it meant to be a family, defined not by secrets or appearances, but by the real work of loving and healing. Yet, the journey was far from smooth. There were setbacks, nights when loneliness crept in, or mornings when a news headline or an old photograph sent Emily spiraling back to darker memories. There were awkward encounters at the grocery store, overheard whispers at Ethan's new school, and moments when she questioned her choices. But each time self-doubt threatened to return, Emily leaned on the new community she was building. Support groups for single parents, a book club of women in transition, a neighbor in her apartment building who became a confidant over shared cups of coffee. She wrote letters to herself, both a record of the pain she was moving through and a promise of the hope she clung to. In one, she captured a sentiment that echoed through her transformation. Maybe you don't ever really get everything back, but you get to write the next chapter. That's something. As time passed, the anger she bore toward Jack and Sarah dulled, not out of forgiveness for their betrayal, but because it no longer defined her. In its place grew compassion for her own exhausted spirit, for the friends who hadn't known how to help, even for the two people whose choices had set this unraveling in motion. She learned to set boundaries with Jack, focusing their communication on co-parenting Ethan and refusing to engage in guilt or blame. Legal battles and custody arrangements were fraught, but Emily approached them with a new self-assurance, supported by her therapist and a circle of friends who saw beyond the scandal. Ethan, too, thrived in the new apartment, making friends at school, inviting Emily to meet the art teacher, whose encouragement sparked his creativity. On weekends, they made a ritual out of movie nights, pancakes for dinner, and long chats on the couch, rituals that became the foundation of their shared new life. Slowly, Emily allowed herself to imagine futures beyond survival. She enrolled in yoga classes, hiked local trails, and returned to painting, a hobby she'd given up after her wedding. What began as a trickle of color and light in her life became streams, an art show at a local cafe, kind messages on social media from people who'd followed her journey, even a tentative first date when she felt ready, rooted in the knowledge that she might stumble again but would never lose herself in someone else. Looking back, the pain didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It reframed her life, coloring her strength in sharper relief. Where once she felt defined by the dissolution of her marriage, Emily now defined herself by what she had overcome and the love she gave freely to her son, to her new friends, and to herself. As the first spring in their new city arrived, Emily rose early one Saturday, opened the windows wide, and listened to the sounds of Ethan's laughter echoing down the hallway. Taking her coffee to the balcony, she wrote one final page in her journal. "We are here. We are whole. I am proud of the woman I am becoming, built not in spite of the ashes, but because of them." Rising from the ashes was not just about healing for Emily. It was about permission to rebuild her world, one honest day at a time, to trust her own voice, and to believe that, after everything, she and her son could flourish. Their story wasn't neat or predictable, but it was real, and, finally, it was theirs.